Io sono Claudio Poli, sono nato a Renon.
Also ich bin im sehr ländlichen Bereich aufgewachsen, meine Eltern haben einen Bauernhof. Und bei mir war es eher so, dass ich einfach keinen Kontakt mit Italienern gehabt habe.
Ich bin ja in einer zweisprachigen Familie aufgewachsen. Meine Mom ist italienisch und mein Papa ist deutsch.
Sono Diego Laratta, sono nato a Bolzano, sono di madrelingua italiana.
Und eben, ich bin dann 8 Jahre deutsche Schule gegangen und dann bin ich in die italienische Schule gegangen.
Mia madre conosceva il tedesco meglio dell'italiano. Stavano
Wir
cambiando.
haben dann auch fast Angst gehabt, mit Italienern zu reden, weil ich habe gedacht, die haben die gleiche Erfahrung wie in der Schule, du warst nicht gelernt.
Le leggi servono, devono stare al passo con i tempi,
Però
no, in questo
devo
momento.
dire, erano almeno 7 anni che io non parlavo.
Wenn ich dann 18 Jahre alt geworden bin und dann müssen entscheiden, welcher Sprachgruppe ich mich zugehörig fühle, dann war das für mich sehr, sehr komisch, um es mal diplomatisch zu sagen.
50 Jahre.
These are some of the infinite experiences of people living in South Tyrol. South Tyrol is part of Trentino Alto Adige in northern Italy. It is at the border with Austria and has a mostly German-speaking population, around 70%. It also has a small minority of people who speak Ladin, a language that is only spoken in 2 South Tyrolean valleys by a few thousand people. The province has a substantial political and economic autonomy, being able to pass its own laws and have total control over the tax money that would usually be managed by Rome. It is the richest Italian province because of an excellent climate that favors agriculture, around 300 sunny days a year, and a flourishing tourism industry. South Tyrol is visited by around 6 million people, which is the same amount of tourists who visit Brazil every year. This makes the region quite wealthy, but also creates difficulties for local people who must deal with extreme traffic and crowded cities, as well as polluted nature. To understand the present-day situation in South Tyrol, it is necessary to study its history. It's best to begin with the end of World War I. In 1918, South Tyrol was officially declared part of the Kingdom of Italy in the Treaty of Versailles. Until this date, it had been mostly under Austrian rules, but it had also been historically contested, with the Dolomites in the north forming a seemingly natural border that would attribute the region to Italy.
Südtirol war ja 555 Jahre Teil von Österreich und da sind natürlich die Geschichte, die Bräuche, viele Gepflogenheiten, das verbindet uns noch stark. Jetzt natürlich politisch hat sich sehr viel getan in den über 100 Jahren.
A majority of the people spoke German and had a deeply Austrian culture, also Austrian traditions and architecture. For example, the traditional dress, Dirndl and Lederhosen, are typically worn in Austria and Germany as well. The cuisine is very different from the Italian one. When the region was taken over by Italy, it was a purely rural economy. Family lived together in big farms and valleys and on the mountains. This meant that it was not very economically advanced. In the 20s and 30s, Italy was ruled by the Fascist Party, which imposed a series of discriminating laws and limitations on the German population.
Durante il fascismo l'Italia aveva preteso che in Alto Adige non si insegnasse la lingua madre tedesca.
Family names were translated into Italian, as were the names of villages, valleys, and mountains. The German language was declared to be illegal in public, as were traditional clothes and costumes. The Fascist Party wanted to completely wipe out the German culture and language. They did this by installing people from all over Italy to work in the newly built industrial complex. This is the reason why, to this day, most Italian people live in the region's biggest city, Bolzano.
Das war die Staatspolitik, die gesagt hat, so, jetzt schauen wir, das ist so ein Ansiedlungsprogramm gewesen, wie in was bei den Palästinenser-Siedlungen, aber es sind auch jüdische Siedlungen eingestellt in die Palästinensergebiete. Und da hat es ähnlich funktioniert. Und ich sage das auch, wir müssen die Leute verstehen, die damals auch gekommen sind nach Südtirol, weil die haben gesagt, bei uns ist so hohe Arbeitslosigkeit, im Süden war die extrem hoch damals. Wir bleiben innerhalb vom gleichen Staat, wir kriegen garantierte Arbeit und eine Wohnung. Du, es geht niemand gern von daheim weg. Aber das ist halt für die eine Möglichkeit gewesen.
The German population, despite these discriminating laws, held on to their identity fiercely.
Per fortuna i tedeschi si sono riusciti ad organizzare con queste scuole Katakombenschulen in cui sono riusciti a insegnare ai propri figli e alla propria popolazione ancora il tedesco.
They also protested and tried to make their voices heard, which more than once ended in violent repression from the government. In 1939, Hitler and Mussolini signed the so-called Option Agreement, which gave South Tyrolean people the option of moving to the Third Reich and leaving fascist Italy behind. They were promised a house, the same amount of land that they owned in South Tyrol, and a generally good, rich life. On the other hand, rumors started spreading in South Tyrol that the Italian government was planning on taking all the people who decided to stay and forcibly transfer them to southern Italy. And this was something that the population obviously didn't want.
L'accordo tra il fascismo e il nazismo è stato terribile per la popolazione sudtirolese e quindi c'è stato questo problema grosso del dover decidere se rimanere in Italia e sentirsi a questo punto italiani.
Although a vast majority thus decided to leave, the war broke out before most actually had the chance to. Those who did move found themselves living in refugee camps or generally in terrible conditions, usually in the newly conquered territory of the Third Reich, such as today's Ukraine. They also lost all their property back home, and many decided to come back and had to face the anger of Italian people and also of the Dableiber, the people who had decided to stay, who often occupied their homes. After World War II, the promises of a substantial autonomy for South Tyrol were repeatedly neglected by the Italian government.
L'accordo De Gasperi-Gruber alla fine della Seconda Guerra Mondiale aveva stabilito che l'Italia avrebbe dovuto dare all'Alto Adige un'autonomia particolare per garantire la sopravvivenza del gruppo etnico tedesco in questo senso. Nulla era stato fatto ancora fino agli anni 60.
The German population began protesting. Most of these protests were peaceful, but there were more violent groups as well. The Bas, for example, organized attacks on electricity poles as a concrete as well as symbolic attack against the government, which many people found was still acting like the fascist party did in relation to minorities. Thus, they wanted to sabotage the industrial complex that they felt had been forcibly imposed on them and had devalued their traditional agricultural work. The organization had clear neo-Nazi traits, which makes its actions controversial up until this day, and caused the unwanted deaths of Italians as well as German citizens. This is generally remembered as a period of instability and unsureness. It is important to remember that the attacks never had people as the target, never threatened the Italians living on the territory directly. It targeted the infrastructure and thus the Italian government in Rome. When Austria regained its full political independence after the Allied occupation of its territory in 1955, it brought the issue of South Tyrol to the United Nations. Austrian politicians wanted to defend this region that had been traditionally a part of their territory, and it had not been given a substantial autonomy by Italy despite the promises made. The UN ordered Italy and Austria to come up with a new autonomy statute that would ensure the protection of the German language and culture.
Quindi c'è stato un accordo tra Italia e Austria, poi c'è stato il primo statuto d'autonomia e il secondo statuto d'autonomia, che è quello attuale in vigore.
Proprio nel 70 e nel 71 era stata avviata la procedura per la legislazione sul bilinguismo, sul proporzionale, su tutte queste cose piuttosto complesse.
Questi due statuti insomma, hanno cercato di rendere possibile questa integrazione, questa unione tra i due mondi e tra le due culture. Si cercava ovviamente di rispettare quella che era la cultura tedesca, perché era la cultura più antica sul territorio.
An agreement was finally reached in 1970, which gave South Tyrol an economic, political and linguistic autonomy within Italy.
La parte economica dell'autonomia era sicuramente più centrale rispetto alle questioni del bilinguismo.
It is now considered one of the best working autonomies in the world, with experts from South Tyrol going to places such as Elsass-Lothringen, Aosta and also Catalonia to give advice.
Aosta war, wie wir früher zum Großteil Deutsch, also über 90%, war Aosta, was also eine Provinz von Italien ist, war zu über 90% Französisch. Und da ist das so gewesen, wie es bei uns halt wieder viele möchten. Also zuerst ein paar Fächer ersetzt durch Italienisch, dann halbe. Und jetzt haben sie leider einzelne Stunden in Französisch als Fremdsprache. Und jetzt, nach 2 Generationen, sagen leider 5%, dass sie französische Muttersprache sind. Das geht extrem schnell.
Ci sono stati poi episodi belli, nel senso appunto questa idea di unione, questa idea di Alto Adige che guardava al futuro, dove l'integrazione tra i popoli era possibile. Dall'altra comunque c'è sempre l'idea che c'è qualcuno o qualcuna che insomma non ha ancora molto accettato questa idea e quindi soffia un po' sul vento dei nazionalismi. Ecco.
Today, the region is officially perfectly bilingual. From street signs to city names, from official bureaucratic documents to announcements made on public transport. To work in a public office, thus for the Italian or provincial government, one must have a language certificate in both languages. However, many people still do not speak the different language, and there are very little contacts between German and Italian-speaking people.
Oftmals ist es wirklich absurd. Also ich denke mir zum Beispiel der Schülerbeirat, es gibt den italienischen Schülerbeirat, den deutschen Schülerbeirat, den ladinischen Schülerbeirat. Ich glaube, die Interessensvertretung der Schüler, der ändert sich jetzt nicht sehr, also was die Schüler brauchen und so, das ändert sich jetzt nicht an der Sprache, die sie sprechen. Nicht? Also ich finde, das eigentlich soll jetzt einfach einen Schülerbeirat geben, was alle Schüler vertreten, dann hatten sie auch viel mehr Aussagekraft.
There are many differing opinions on how things should be in the future.
Wir müssen den Fremdsprachenunterricht ändern. Das Italienische, speziell in der Oberschule, wird so veraltet unterrichtet.
L'altro peccato insomma, che possiamo un po' rilevare in Alto Adige è che purtroppo esiste ancora un po' questi 2 Mondi divisi. No?
Zurzeit ist es natürlich so, es ist vielleicht nicht mehr wie früher, wo wirklich alles nochmal extra getrennt worden ist, sondern es gibt jetzt schon eben einen Austausch.
Però ecco, anche come luoghi di incontri per i giovani eccetera, bisognerebbe incentivare molto di più lo scambio.
Ich bin absolut nicht dafür, Fächer auszutauschen oder in einer anderen Sprache zu unterrichten. Die Experimente, da bin ich sehr skeptisch.
Die Schulen seien ja zum Teil schon zweisprachig. Also es seien ganz viele Eltern, die ihre Kinder in die Schule schicken von der jeweils anderen Sprache.
Se uno conosce le 2 lingue, può dichiararsi al momento del censimento e anche il censimento successivo di una lingua o di un'altra, a seconda di come gli piace.
Ich habe ein Jahr lang gebraucht, ich habe keine Ahnung, was tue ich jetzt mit Deutsch oder Italienisch. Und die haben es einfach total ein Wahnsinn gefunden, dass man das als Zweisprachiger, dass man sich da noch entscheiden kann und dass es dann nicht andere Möglichkeiten gibt und auch, dass es eben keine zweisprachige Schule gibt und das Ganze.
Oggi come oggi si potrebbe sostenere che invece di avere proporzionali etniche sarebbe giusto avere delle proporzionali secondo il fabbisogno, secondo le effettive esigenze della popolazione che cerca di lavorare e cerca il posto.
Heutzutage ist die typische Kultur von da nicht wegen den Italienern in Gefahr wie vor 2 Generationen, wo man versucht hat, einfach 1000 Italiener herzuholen, um die Deutschen in die Minderheit zu drücken. Sondern heute muss man schauen, einfach, es ist natürlich Migration aus verschiedenen Ländern und so weiter. Nicht? Dass du, wenn du dich nicht bemühst, irgendwie deine Kultur, deine Bräuche und so weiter aufrechtzuerhalten, dann sind die in einer Generation weg.
Alex Langer, il nostro politico più intelligente che la provincia autonoma di Bolzano abbia espresso, lui diceva che la cosa più importante è il contatto tra le popolazioni.
Il bello dell'Alto Adige secondo me è che la storia si scrive tutt'oggi, cioè non è una storia di 3000 anni che uno dice 3000 anni fa, poi cioè stiamo parlando di 70 anni fa, di 60 anni fa, il secondo statuto di autonomia l'hanno fatto nel 72 e che si è concluso solo nel 92 con l'Austria che insomma ha dichiarato concluso la cosa.
Im Aktivismus, ich bin ja jetzt länger in Fridays for Future tätig, sind eben Leute aus der deutschen Sprachgruppe, aus der italienischen Sprachgruppe und das funktioniert relativ gut, also jeder spricht in der eigenen Sprache.
Il bello dell'Alto Adige è anche proprio un po' che la storia la scriviamo noi, infatti come giovani è bello ed è giusto che noi ci impegniamo quotidianamente, insomma, perché è tutta da scrivere, ecco. Non diamo nulla per scontato.